And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey folks, I'm Tom Vasel. Several years ago, well over a decade in fact, one of the most influential board games ever to come out was Caylus. Caylus, which had a very dour-looking guy on the cover, was one of the first worker placement games where you would place workers on a place and get an action from them. It was also one of the meaner Euro games. In fact, I might argue that many of the Euro games were meaner back then than they are today, in this Provost character, who is certainly one of the most hated pieces in gaming. So Caylus itself was a very involved game. It's not overly complex, but there was a lot going on as you helped the king build a castle or whatever, and he came by and checked it out, and he was going to see who helped him build the most. That sort of thing. Well, we have kind of the same thing going on here in what is a reprint or almost sequel, Caylus 1303. Now, Caylus 1303 is the same game as the original one, the same rules, but they've streamlined a lot of stuff and they've changed and added a few things. Now, you don't need to know the original game, and I'm only going to refer to the original game here in a little bit of comparison at the end. If you've never played the original Caylus, don't worry about it. This is one you can jump into now. I just want to give you the fact that this game has a bit of a pedigree growing in. Caylus was certainly a divisive style game. Some people really loved it, and other people hated it. I liked it, and it faded a bit for me over the years, so I was wondering, could this reprint kind of swing me back and like it more? Let's find out. The goal of Caylus is to get the most points after 9 rounds. You'll keep track of them at the top of the board. There's going to be some starting buildings that are randomly placed here. You'll start with a wooden building and a stone building. You're also going to place with a regular building, a wooden building, and a stone building up there. Each player is going to get a special ability. These all do various things over the course of the game, and you'll have 3 of them placed up here at the top also. Players are going to start with a certain number of workers based on how many players are in the game. And then players are going to take turns placing workers on buildings that are out here. You can only place a building on a spot where nobody is already. So if the red player is placed here, green player can't go there. It has to be a building that can be placed into. Some are printed on the board. You can also stop anytime you want to. When you stop, you're going to get to move here and be the first person to pass. You'll be the first person to place next round also. Also, once someone passes, everyone has to throw away one of their workers back here to the camp every time they place one out. So once someone passes, it makes it more expensive for everybody else. Once everyone has passed, you're then going to start from here and go all the way up to where the provost is. Now, the provost starts right before the last building. Some of the spaces will move him, and everyone here has a chance to pay workers to move him in either direction. So if he's moved up to here, players will only do all these buildings. Even if players have placed workers in these buildings, they won't happen. Although he can also be moved in the other direction, allowing these buildings to have things happen in them. Once a player uses a building, they'll take their worker and they'll put their worker back here. You're going to get a few more of these every round, so you might want to save some for future rounds. The buildings do various things. So you can see over here, this one lets you pay a wood to get a favor. I'll explain that in a bit. This one here lets you pay a silk to put out a house next to one of these starting buildings. Once you do that, at the end of the round, you'll be turning that over, and from now on, you'll get an extra worker back from the supply between every round. This one here lets you build one of the wooden buildings. So like I said, there's a whole pile of extra wooden buildings. You can build these buildings. They have different costs in them. For example, this one here costs 2 wood. And when you build them, you're going to place it on the board, and you're going to put one of your houses on it to show that that building is your building. If someone else places a worker in your building, not yourself, you're going to get a victory point. You also can move the provost, like I said, over here. most of these are going to let you either spend resources to get workers or just get various resources of different types. And as more and more buildings come out, like for example this going here gives you 3 workers, but there's all sorts of buildings both in wooden and stone buildings. One of the wooden buildings allows you to start building stone buildings, and the stone buildings can give you all kinds of cool things, including victory points. Players also at the end of their turn have the ability to upgrade a residence, that's when you flip over one of those buildings, a residence to a monument by paying these resources, which as you can see are worth quite a few victory points. Players can also place their workers up here. Here you're going to help build the construction site. They always want food and then 2 other different resources. You turn those in and they'll be turned in this order, and you're going to get 5 victory points for doing that. The first person also gets a favor. Now whenever you get a favor in this game, you're going to either get to use one of these buildings that's up here, so you can see there's 3 different buildings to use, or you can steal the special ability somebody else has in front of them, and then if there are any of these characters special abilities left on the board, you can take it and put it in front of you, giving you an extra special ability. These special abilities do all sorts of things, like for example this one here lets you move the provost once per turn. This one, someone else puts a worker in one of your buildings, you get 2 victory points. And there's this one once per turn you can put your worker where somebody else is. This is a very popular one. When you place your worker in someone else's building, they get no victory points. So there's all kinds of special abilities that you'll have here. And that's pretty much it. You're just going to take turns. You'll get a couple things. Some buildings will give you resources from round to round. And after the 9th round, you're going to count up your your victory points. Plus, gold bars are worth 2 of these victory points. And then whoever has the most victory points is the winner of the game. The game comes with a lot of different resources, and I think the resources are pretty cool. There's pink food and cloth, and they're shaped differently. The tokens for victory points themselves are okay. They're just a bunch of cardboard tokens. I like the wooden pieces. The tiles also look really neat and nice. There's some symbology on them, but there's not a lot. So I would argue that they're not that hard to figure out. The whole board looks really pretty. As you place the buildings, as more and more buildings are going to get placed out on this board, it's just going to look better and better as you place these different buildings. And I like this a lot. I think it's a really neat concept, and the buildings can be turned over into residences, which is also a pretty neat idea, and the artwork on everything just looks really good. My only problem with symbology might be from the characters themselves, because there's a lot of them. And again, once you figure out what they do, it's not hard, but there is literally no text in the game itself. But everything looks really well done. Okay, so first of all, this game is fairly different than the original Caylus, especially with those different characters that give you special abilities. They've also streamlined the building at the top and just a few things in general. The provost and the pieces and how he moves, it's just a whole lot easier. So component-wise and picture-wise, oh my word, is this better than the original game. I like it a lot. Looks great. The streamlining, though, has been really good for this game. I will never play the original Caylus again. This is much better in my opinion. It's easier to get into, it's easier to understand, it's faster to play. A game here of Caylus might take, what is the box here says 60 to 90 minutes. That's pretty accurate. And I think even with 90 minutes, some people are playing fairly slowly. Now, this game itself is a very involved game. There's some good concepts in this game that were used in other games, but they work. As in, I build a building. You can use that building, and then you give me a victory point. I might want to use the building myself, but I don't give myself a victory point. So I'm trying to build buildings that I don't necessarily want to use, but I know that other people will want to use them. There's a really interesting worker mechanism to this game as I place workers out. But I don't want to use all my workers because next turn then I only have a few, the ones that I get in between rounds. Or maybe I want to save up and then just be able to put out a lot, but if I have a lot, sometimes other people have taken all the spots I want to put them in. or a spot I really liked and I was going to use, someone has eventually just converted that into a dwelling place. And then there's a race between players to get and build these monuments, to upgrade their dwelling places into these monuments, which are worth a lot of points. Then there's all this going on. You have secondary stuff going on with players fighting to build at the top, to deliver stuff to the people building the castle. That's worth 5 points every time you do it, which is no small amount in this game. And then there's that favor you get too, where I can take extra actions and or steal the special abilities. And those special abilities are really useful. I've seen a player have 3 or 4 of them in front of them. After a while, you're like, why are we giving that person so much extra stuff? So it's good. There's this nice flow and ebb to the game. And the Provost. So this is, I think, something that will cause some people to hate the game. And it definitely has caused me to hate other players. See, as you place buildings in this game, the first 3 buildings are always safe. The next 4 or 5 are likely safe. But players, if there's a special character and there's a spot on the board that let you move the Provost a little bit, but everybody can pay up to 3 workers to move it 3 in any direction. So there's a couple things, like I'll be putting workers close to where the Provost is. Now I'm a little nervous. Will I move the Provost a little bit farther down the trail just so someone else doesn't move it back? Will someone give up some of their workers just to deny me a resource? It happens a lot. You will hate the Provost because occasionally players will move it and knock you over. Now, some of this does depend on the players in the game. If players are playing vicious and cutthroat, that Provost will knock people off. The houses that are near the end of each time, there's a good chance they may or may not get used, or you might use it, but at the expense of having to pay 3 workers just so you can move the Provost far enough that other people can't block you. Sometimes someone will move it, but not far enough, and it doesn't get to the building that you were going to use, and there's this just angst there. I've also seen people play this very passively, where people didn't really mess with the Provost very much at all. And if that's the case, the game still works, although I think it works a little bit better when players are being meaner. So this is not a game that at the end of it you might all sing Kumbaya. There might be a little bit of annoyance, but the whole thing isn't that straightforward. At the same time, sometimes you're working together to move the Provost against another player. So I like it. It's refreshing because I kind of expected to not like this one that much. I expected to play it and go, oh yeah, this one hasn't aged well. Well, whether the original game or not has aged well, this version has. It fits very well. It came out in 2019. It fits well in that time frame, and I like it. If you've never played Caylus, I highly recommend it. If you played Caylus and liked it, I highly recommend it. And I would have a hard time understanding why someone might want to go back to the older one other than nostalgia, because this new one is just the same thing, but a nice, clean system. Caylus has been touted by people for many, many a year. It's not always been easy to find. Now it is in a nice, new, streamlined deluxe version, and it's really good. Dice Tower Judgment, excellent.
Thanks so much for watching another Dice Tower video. If you enjoy our videos, subscribe to the channel for more fun, comprehensive board game coverage. Also, consider joining us at one of our events. Come to Dice Tower Retreat, a small, intimate gathering where gaming is king. Join us for Dice Tower Cruise, the largest board game cruise. Attend Dice Tower West in Las Vegas for gaming fun on the West Coast, or Dice Tower East in Orlando in sunny Florida. Dice Tower Conventions, the friendliest gaming conventions on Earth. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching the Dice Tower.